How's it going, Evangel? My name's Pastor Rich. I'm here with Pastor Ben and Pastor Jordan, and this is the Next Gen Podcast. How's it going, Evangel? Thank you once again for tuning into another episode of the Next Gen Podcast. Today, our topic is going to be stewarding your time. This is somewhat of a, Christianese word, stewarding, but really what it means in essence is managing your time, but stewarding puts the biblical emphasis of using your time well in the eyes of the Lord is kind of how I would define it.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're talking about. And there's a lot of things that can kind of go into it. It can cross over into, extracurricular time, leisure time. How do you find that balance of, really not going to church, not reading your Bible, not listening to worship music, not reading, what do you do with the rest of your time? Should you do anything else? And to some of you, that may seem like a silly question. You'll be like, well, obviously I can do other things besides that. But maybe to some other people, and honestly, including myself for quite a long time, it's like, maybe I shouldn't do anything else with my time. Should I feel guilty if I'm doing anything else? That's some of the questions that we're going to be tackling in today's episode. And how we're going to do that is that we're just going to go over just some personal examples from our lives and how that kind of questioning and trying to steward our time well affected us and what that looked like throughout our lives, whether that's through our childhood, adolescence, sports, extracurricular activities, when you start having your own time, stuff like that. So, Pastor Ben, how about you lead us off? What did it look like for you? And maybe when did you kind of get maybe an awareness of, I kind of have to manage my time. Like I get to kind of pick. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, I'm glad that we're talking about the start, because I was saying to these guys at the beginning, I feel like I'm always talking about the same sort of routine that I go through. So you guys are probably like, I've heard this so many times. So for me, it was probably around, sophomore year of high school, maybe sophomore, junior year, where it started to really, I realized the importance of time,
Yep.
right? I was a 3-sport athlete, and, I never really missed church.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Football, basketball.
I ran track for the longest time. Also played baseball. So
Pastor Rich couldn't count to 3. That was the
Yeah, that was the real problem.
yes. So, but with that, Jordan's over here. Pastor Jordan's counting to 3 on his fingers.
You don't need to show off. Right?
But it was so in those times, right? I see now a lot of teenagers that they're missing church because of practices. I never had to worry about that. All my practices for everything were always right after school, everything like that. But so it never affected my church schedule. But that was when I realized okay, I'm busy, but I also have to have time for the Lord and for my life. And honestly, when you throw in extracurricular activities as well, or stuff that we use to bide our time, I realized that at those times of my life, there wasn't a whole lot of, my own personal time with God.
Yeah.
There was a lot of just I'm done with practice, so now 17, 16-year-old Ben's going to go play video games. Or I'm going to go watch TV or watch a movie or whatever. And I kind of just allowed my faith to, I don't know if this goes into a whole different conversation, but kind of allowed that time to be taken up by something else. And I realized that my relationship with Christ I wasn't giving it time. I wasn't stewarding my time for that, really.
Well, it's almost like you kind of, as you get older, you kind of realize you're you start with your time kind of being decided for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, I have all the freedom to do whatever I want. And I don't know about you, and I'm sure you would agree, but my first inclination is not to be I'm going to go read the word as a high schooler, but you have to make those decisions.
Yeah. Oh, and I was talking to a parent, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, and we had a conversation, and he was telling me, he's like, man, it's so hard because, and I'm not a parent, obviously, but he said to me, it's very hard for me that my schedule kind of has to revolve around my kids and their lives. It's when do I get to have a say in the stewarding, and not stewarding time, but really what he was saying was stewarding time for himself, right? Because my whole life revolves around my kids' sports schedules, my kids this and that, what is needed here and what is needed that. So that honestly, I understand the struggle of, being able to steward time as a parent too. And Pastor Jordan, I'm sure you could speak a little bit to that with your kids and all the stuff that they're involved in, stewarding time as an adult,
Yeah, no, it's a lot. I think that I'm, just to be very honest, I'm really struggling right now with this, in a sense of like taking time for myself.
Yeah.
Like for me, like we had a day, like my kids were at my in-laws and me and Holly are home, and Holly's like, I'm gonna go in the garden, and I'm like, all right, well, what can I work on? You're working. She's like, no, it's like my hobby. You need to go do something to enjoy yourself. And I just couldn't. Like I was like, should I go watch something? Should I go play like a video game or something? And I felt guilty about doing it.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I should be reading, I should be praying, and I'm like, how does this work, man? Like, because ultimately that's going to fill me more. Like, I know that, and it shouldn't ever feel like work or anything, right? Like, but so I really like feel like I'm coming into this episode with like a lot of questions myself,
Yeah.
and maybe just processing out loud. And if it's helpful, great. But like I just don't, like, I don't have a lot of answers for this stuff, and I feel like it changes on different seasons of my life, and I'm just trying to figure a lot of this stuff out.
Yeah.
So I do remember, to go back to your point about sports and stuff, when I got saved, I was 15. I was a triathlete as well. Not really practices affecting like youth on Wednesdays, but like games did. So I wrestled, I was playing tennis, and so
You're so good at pickleball.
yeah. Well, I don't know. I got worked by a 68-year-old just on Monday. So yeah, yeah.
Years of practice.
Yeah. But I remember I quit those teams because I wanted to be at church.
Wow.
And like I love doing those things, but there was just more value in being at church, and I knew that. Like, I knew I needed to be there.
Yeah.
So I think it, but now I'm in a different season of life where I've got to reevaluate. So I feel like this conversation, you're constantly reevaluating, depending on, like, you have kids. Oh, I'm in college, I'm working, I'm doing a different job now my hours are different. Like, I just feel like it's always changing for all of us.
Yeah, well, I think one of the main things is that you have to evaluate how much time that you have. You were talking about those different seasons. It's like, well, ultimately, I think it's all about priorities. I think that's the ultimate thing of like, is wrestling and doing sports in school bad? I would argue no.
No, of course.
Right? But if it's coming into the place of church, that's when for you made the decision of like, you know what, this church has to have a higher priority.
Yeah.
Where I'm sure if you're in different seasons of life, like I think about my time at Valley Forge, man, there's a lot of video games, probably too much, but not to justify it, but at least at that point, like I had chapel, almost every day. It was being fed. And so one could argue in that season, it's like, it's okay to have more leisure while you're at school, but maybe when you're a parent, you have kids and your life is running at a million miles a second, you finally, like, whether it's in the morning where it's that lull where, things are like, okay, it's like, ooh, I have less time.
Yeah.
So it's like, now do I play the video games, or now do I focus on that or something else? Or it could be like, I don't want this to just include habits that maybe most people view as like a waste of time, quote unquote. This could be anything from like reading a book, gardening, that people look at and are like, oh yeah, that's good too. It's like all of that incorporated. But I do think it's a matter of priorities and, what your time looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can even say for me, like I mentioned, a lot of my sports and stuff never was a conflict for church, and that was something that my parents emphasized a ton too. That like, if there's something for church, we're probably there.
Yeah.
Right? And like, yeah, I'm a pastor's kid, like just like you are, Pastor Jordan. So like, I'm sure you resonate with that a lot too.
Rich wouldn't know.
Right? Yeah, Rich wouldn't know.
That's cool.
Sorry, man.
Yeah, not school sports,
Not
or
school
pastor's
sports.
kid.
Oh, no.
All right,
Sorry.
this has been Rich. I'll see myself.
Wow, this has been Rich. What a pun. That was great.
Oh.
So anyway, sorry, enough of a tangent, but it is hard because I see it so much now with kids that like, and I mentioned that a little bit, but there is a lot more conflict with church. And in my time, and that was only 6-7 years ago, that for me, like those times where I'm like, I think I had one Wednesday game for anything
Yeah.
of all my seasons. Never had anything on Sundays, never, and like we had a one Wednesday night game and I missed church one time. And I remember I was like, this is weird. This is weird not going to youth group, right?
Yeah.
Not to say that, if your kids aren't going to youth group on Wednesday because of sports, shame on you. I'm not saying that.
No.
But it is a bigger issue now that we see, at least I see as a youth pastor.
Can I actually, not to interrupt, Pastor Jordan, is that just because you have a little bit more, you've seen through the years as a youth pastor, is this seems like a new problem that practice, or I could be completely wrong, but it seems like I'm hearing a lot of like, oh yeah, I have a game on Sunday or I have a game on Wednesday.
I don't.
Like, is it?
It's been a problem for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in youth ministry for, I think it was 8 or 9 years. And it's always been an issue. I don't know if it's a Buffalo thing, maybe
I'd say-
Syracuse, there's not playing on Wednesdays.
Maybe I got lucky, and
Yeah.
maybe it is a Syracuse thing because there was never really stuff.
Well,
know that.
you're right to your point, though. I would say, like, I've talked with parents in our church just over the past couple of weeks about, like, just how everything is kind of all in now, like
Yeah.
with the camps, and they got to do these, you got to go to this workshop,
Like
and
off-season workouts.
yeah,
stuff
like there's
that.
a lot of
Yeah,
extra
yeah.
stuff, and then like, two-a-days and things like that, and like they were talking about there's never been Sunday games, but now that there's like always a Sunday game. So I do think that's newer, I think. But yeah.
Well, not to get too into a different conversation, but I think that kind of goes with the changing times of today,
Yeah.
right? There is less of a sacred emphasis on Sunday,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And but again, that's a conversation for a different time. So obviously, like, not to move on to our next question, but how do you overcome that? How do you find a balance between extracurricular activities and your time with God, right? So that's something that we kind of have talked about a little bit here and there. Pastor Jordan, you even mentioned that, like, it's kind of a tough topic for you because, I mean, I can resonate with that. It is sometimes hard to feel like that balance. Sometimes I feel convicted with the amount of time that, or maybe the lack of time that I maybe spend,
Yeah, well, I
Gonna hear the anguish in there.
Like, oh God.
it's just such a problem for me right now because like this is the reason why I do that is just because like I'm in the middle of it right now. Like I'm all right. I'm literally
You've been through it for a long.
yes,
Yeah.
and I'm leaving for Hawaii in 2 hours.
Yep.
So, but like I haven't taken a vacation in a year, and it's not because of anybody else's fault. It's my fault. And what my problem is, and the tension that you are talking about for me is like, I find my value in my work, instead of my identity in Christ.
Yeah,
that's my problem. That's what I'm working through and have been working through for years. I would say I'm a workaholic, probably. I try, I really do, but like I go home and I do stuff around the house. I go home and my wife's like, just sit down, like eat Father's Day. Like she yelled at me. She's like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I just gotta clean this before, She's like, just stop. And I couldn't, I didn't listen to her at all. I just kept doing it because I'm like, well, we're trying to get ready to go this week. Like we have to do this.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of things that play for that for me. Is one is I find my identity in it, as I mentioned, and then two is I think there's an element of I don't trust God, so I need to do it.
Yeah.
I can't like my friend Ryan Kick. He's never gonna listen to this, even though he's my friend. But I called him 2 months ago, and we talked about this. We've talked since. He's my accountability guy. I love him to death. But we had this long conversation about like Sabbath and stuff because him and his wife take that very, very seriously.
Good.
And I read a book on it, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by Comer. Great book. Didn't do anything for me, but great book. And not because it's not good, it's because I don't listen. Like
You have the knowledge, you just don't put it into practice.
I just can't.
Yeah.
And I was talking with him and he's like, have you ever tried this? I'm like, dude, I can't imagine doing that. And so I think those are my two problems is like, and I think that's what bleeds into the conversation for everybody else is like, is our identity in the sport? Is our identity in our job? Is our identity even in our kids? Like, Just throwing it out there, man. Like sometimes we sacrifice church because, well, my kid's doing this travel league, see you in 4 months. And I'm like, listen, man, I'm sorry if you're listening, please know my heart in this. Like, I'm not trying to attack you in any way, but my job as a parent is to raise kids that love Jesus.
Yeah.
And they haven't. Pastor Rich has created an awesome environment for that. Pastor Ben has created an awesome environment for that. Like places for your kids to get that. And we don't want them to have it. It's more important that they're on a team and they're doing this. And
Well, it's for their future, right?
is it?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I agree. I'm
Right.
that like
No,
it
I
is the
know.
future. It's
yeah.
that's the mindset, right? Is that we're providing for the kids in the future, but we'd rather provide a foundation of Christ. Right?
Yes. Right.
That's the more important part.
Yeah. And that's where the tension is for me is like, I want my kids, like my dad always said when we were younger, he goes, I don't care if you're a bum, just be the best Christian bum in the world. So,
That's a great quote.
yeah. And like, you didn't think, like every other kid, I thought I'd be a professional athlete in my sport, right? We all thought that.
Yep.
But the statistics are, even to play D1, like it's 1% of us. And then how many of those go to the professional level? It's like 1% of that. But we're sacrificing everything because our kids are like, well, I want to be a professional baseball player when they're like 9, so it's hard, man. It's really hard. I think a lot of it for me and maybe for other people is just coming back to the identity part of it.
Yeah.
My identity isn't, I'm good at this. I'm not good at like reading my Bible and like figuring things. And it's like, but what we need to do is make that our focus, become good at those things, become good at trusting God, become good at walking in the Spirit, become good at living on mission, because that's all that really matters.
Yeah. And even to touch a little bit on the sports stuff, even though homeschooled. But
You did a sport.
I did.
You did a sport.
I did do karate. And no, but for real. I did do that, and I remember my mom telling me, when we were starting this, it's like, if this ever conflicts with church is going to win. Like, church is never going to win a battle over you. She's like, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Like, you can, if you want to do whatever. I actually did a lot. There was at one point I was doing like karate, gymnastics, like a bunch of stuff, like tournament preparation. Like, I was really into this, and not that it always translated to going to church. But at the very least, she was like, in our schedules, like, we are never going to schedule anything during Sunday at like church time.
Yeah.
She was like, and trust me, there are other ways. Like, no one is doomed if like you're in a position where like, oh, I work Sundays, or like, you're not doomed. Should you try to get out of that? Yes. There are some alternatives, but nothing beats the congregational setting of being part of a church family. You can't replace that.
Yeah.
Right. And so she's like, so that, and then for us, youth group was on Wednesdays, and she was like, hey, karate was Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And it was like, once I started kind of really going to youth group in my later teens, it was like, yeah, no, you're going Monday, Friday, but not Wednesday.
Wow.
Like, it's just the way it is.
It's funny you say that because you guys, I never told you this. You want to know the reason why I've never played football?
Why?
Because Pee Wee was on Sundays.
Oh, wow.
And my brother was always a very natural athlete, very, very, very talented. And I remember my brother was just playing like at this, he's still like this very, very young, but he was very ahead for his age and stuff. And the coach came up to my dad and he goes, if you get him in Pee Wee, one day he'll be playing on Saturdays, meaning college football at D1 or whatever. And he goes,
wait, I'm sorry.
Yes,
Pee-wee?
exactly.
Pee-wee?
Exactly.
Listen, I'm
not done with the quote.
Sorry.
And then he goes, and I believe one day he'll play on Sundays.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is he playing on Sundays?
No.
Okay.
Because my dad wouldn't let him become an NFL player,
So-
obviously.
So what I'm getting from this quote is that your dad prevented Josiah from being an NFL
Yeah,
player.
exactly.
Wow.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Shame. So, but he said
That's what coaches say, though.
that's what they say.
Yeah.
And bro, who are they? Like some, Derek's dad said that. Like who the heck? It's like stupid.
Yeah.
But I remember my dad saying, "Boys, you're not going to play football
Yeah.
because it's on Sundays, and we go to church on Sundays." Now there was the occasional soccer thing on Sunday, whatever. But we would go to church first, and then we would go whatever. That's different, but like it was always a priority. I do remember though, there was a season where Wednesday nights, just to give a different perspective than Pastor Rich, which is funny because you'd think the pastor would do what Christine did. But there were a couple of Wednesday nights. He said, yeah, you're playing baseball, that's okay. And he told the board, hey, I want to be at my son's game. Like, it's important to support my son. So
there's a balance.
There's a balance. And I say that to counterbalance what we all said earlier too, that like, there's got to be balance.
Yes.
There's no right or wrong answers. 100%. And we are not prescribing like, screw sports. All of us here are athletes. Yeah. All of us here played on teams. And all of us had benefits as a result of that.
Yeah.
Even to jump in from another perspective too, I was in band for years of my life.
Oh yeah, so that's different.
Yeah, and there's a lot of kids and I've talked to some parents that have been like, man, why are we having a concert on a Wednesday? Like I'm not kidding. There've been like 8 concerts this year on a Wednesday. Either they're lying to me or no, I'm just kidding.
You know who you are.
Some names,
but but the funny part is that, or the hard part is about it, is that you spend all this time like daily, right? Like you have band every single day in high school, and you are spending all this time practicing, and you don't even know when your concert is, and then you get told your concert is that, and like parents are like, oh, I want to be here, especially when it's like youth staff too. Like, man, like I really want to be here. Like I don't want my students' lives to control, or my kids' lives to control like my availability. It's like, well, no, you should go to those things.
Yeah.
Like you should not feel guilty about going to your kids' like band concert because they worked hard for that.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes hand in hand with you because it's not just sports, right?
Or plays.
Yeah, plays, exactly. Yes. Like I was never in a play, but I mean, it's still all the same things that like, especially because kids nowadays are so busy, right?
Well, yeah. Here's the thing too. Like, just to go back to my example with the tennis and the wrestling and stuff.
Yeah.
My parents didn't make me do that.
Yeah.
I chose to do that.
Yeah.
Because I knew, first of all, for just the wrestling team in general, I needed to get away from those guys because they were taking me down a bad road.
Yeah.
And I made that decision for my life, where it was like, hey, I need to be in church.
Yep.
I need to do this. So I think that's a lot of it too. I really believe in having like conversations with our kids.
Good.
And allowing them to be a part of the decision-making process together.
Yeah.
Because not to quote Herwick again, but we're not deciding like if something is wrong or right. We're deciding if something is wise. And for me, at that stage in my life, it wasn't wise for me to be doing those things and not at church. So I think that's a big distinction. Just going forward.
I even think another distinction, just really quick to mention, is that even like with the scheduling thing, there's a big difference between signing up for something or being a part of something that it's like right out the gate. Like you are going to be committed to every Sunday or like every Wednesday, as opposed to like you're committed to something and then occasionally.
Yes.
Like, because I've heard stories, and you guys would have to confirm, I assume it's the same, but parents would be like, oh yeah, I got their schedule like 3 days ago, like for this week.
Right.
It'd be like, and so things happen, but again, it's like, if you are struggling with that question, I think this is something that maybe we actually know we should address, is that we're talking about like, we need to find the balance. Where do we look to find, what basis, what, point of truth do we say like, all right, is this too much? Is this too little? Like, how do we find that?
Yeah. So I think another thing I'm kind of thinking about too is like so just to walk through, like to share my family's journey right now, what decisions we're making. So we're homeschooling next year for a lot of reasons, but one of the factors is the average time that parents are spending with their kids is like 36 minutes a day.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I saw that the other day.
So they're getting up and they're going to school and then they're going to sports and then they're, and then like they're getting home, shoving food in their mouth, studying, I guess, and then just going to bed. And then they're getting up and doing it again. And I'm like, dude, like you're in extracurricular stuff and at school and everything for like 10 hours a day. And then we wonder like, why we have bad relationships with our kids. And like, we just decided as a family, like, that's not going to work for us. And my kids aren't even in high school yet, but like, we were doing that, and then they had sports and gymnastics and this and that. And so, you know, for us, like, we're planning like family days on Fridays and my day off and stuff. We're going to go do something in Buffalo and make it teaching thing. Just always like being intentional about that, but then spending that time that we have that'll come out of it. So
Listen, I'm just saying, if you want your kids to be on a podcast one day and to quote you all the time, you should homeschool your kids.
Work for Christine.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you guys this. I heard this once when I was a kid, and I think it's kind of like contributed to all of like not all of these issues. Have you ever heard somebody say that you've got to tithe your time?
I have.
10% of 24 hours is 2 hours and 40 minutes. Are you spending that with Jesus every day?
I've never heard that person.
I have.
I had a speaker say that once when I was a teenager, and it like really messed with me. I was like, why am I not tithing my time? Why am I not now? Okay, like in principle, I think it's worth thinking about, right? But like,
Sure.
but like for me, that really set me back. That really set me back. Because I mean, first of all, you're sleeping for like 10 of those, 8 of those, whatever. I don't know. So, but I don't know. I just
go to the bathroom, you eat.
right. Like it just felt so. But
Realistic, I would say.
yes, yeah.
I think it's. I'll let you continue, but I want to mention. I feel like that this conversation. One of the reasons I wanted to have it is that many of the resources you get, where you're asking like, what should I do with my time? I feel like a lot of Christian resources are like legalism, boom.
Yeah.
You need to. So I don't feel like that's uncommon.
Yeah. So I'm just curious. I don't know. I kind of want to have a conversation about that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in the middle. I do feel like, you know, like you said, Pastor Rich, that feels legalistic. I do think that like we shouldn't be like, oh, this is my time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like a lot of us are so focused on, you know, maybe like what we do with our time, and like, oh, I'm just super busy, right? Like for me on a Wednesday, I'm like, oh, to give 2 hours and 40 minutes of my time, dude, like my day is packed on a Wednesday. I can't do that. It's like, okay. What my mom always used to say to me is, oh, well, you can't find time for Jesus? All right, make time for Jesus.
Yes. Yeah.
So it is like, I don't want to sit here and be like, nah, I don't agree 100%. Like, I can understand how you take it one way, too extreme, either way.
Yeah.
Sure.
No matter what way you look
Yeah.
at it. But I do still think that, you know, it's something to be aware of.
I think
It
we should.
really is.
It's like we should have goals.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like, because I think in my mind it's just like, even I think it's okay to like audit yourself, to like write
yeah.
down for a week, like
I agree.
you know, and I think it might surprise us, like, whoa, how many hours I spent like watching Netflix, or like just for different crowds. I'm just trying to, you know, like how many times how long I'm watching the news,
Yep.
or you know, how long I'm, you know, I don't know, whatever it is, but like there's something that is always vying for our attention, and I don't think it's like we're supposed to live like this ascetic lifestyle where we live in the woods and we don't do anything else. And like I don't think that the monastics had a bad heart in doing that either, though. They want to be close with God. I think that's fine. Like as long as it's not like the earning piece of like, oh, I'm doing this to earn salvation and the approval of God. I think that's like the big distinction.
Yeah.
But like we should be striving for more time with God, but there should be, you know, time to, you know, sit back and cast a reel and try to catch a fish or something, you know, like
Enjoy the work of your hands.
right.
I think the book of Ecclesiastes puts it.
Yeah. Like I'll sit on my porch, you know, and just kind of watch the sunset and think about the Lord a little bit. But then sometimes, you know, I'll watch a show, like, you know, like put the kids to bed. It's 8:30 by the time they come out and ask water for the 800th time. And then they need a snack.
You put like a water fountain. You need to just install one, dude.
In their room. It's actually
I did say that as a joke. But when you're saying that, I think that one of the things I think we forget in this conversation is that I think we try to find an answer pretty much anywhere outside of just asking God. I feel like when we think about this, I think it's because we have I don't know if it's a cultural thing, but I think we have the expectation that if we ask God, what do you want to do? What should I do with my free time? I think, at least in my mind, I don't know, but like, I feel like we're just expecting God to be like crossing his arms, looking down and being like, what do you think you should be doing?
Figure it out, dummy.
But I don't think that's God's attitude at all. Like, if you're like, oh, I need my me time, and your me time is 8 hours of binging Netflix, like numbing yourself out.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
like, I think God is gonna be like, well, I don't think you should do that. But if it's, what should I do with this like hour of time? Like, I've got my ducks in a row to a sense. Like, is God gonna be like, zap button if you don't do that, or if it's gonna be like, maybe he gives you another answer?
That's I'm glad you brought that up, because it literally was something I was already thinking about. Was like a conversation that I like to have with mature Christians. And that doesn't necessarily mean like mature, like super, like, oh, like you're 30 plus or something like that.
Yeah.
It's just people that I know that aren't going to excuse certain things. It's like, okay, have you brought it to God and see what he thinks? Like, what do you feel convicted about the time that you're spending? Okay, if you feel convicted about that, then maybe you should be spending more time. If you don't feel conviction, and this is why I say mature Christians,
Yeah.
because I don't want it to be like, oh, well, I don't feel any sort of way. I don't feel, convicted. Or I don't feel at all. Like, I'm good. So, like, my time.
That's a bigger problem.
Right. That's why I like to say, like, okay, do you feel this conviction in this? And then if so, bring it to God. And like, then maybe you need to spend more.
Yeah.
So that's a healthy thing.
I think the hard thing is like, I have the conversations with people, like we've been talking about the two spectrums. Like, I've had conversations with people and they're like, yeah, I Sabbathed yesterday. And I'm like, oh, what does that look like?
Right.
And they're like, well, I watched 4 seasons of this show. And I'm like, oh, how long did that take you? Like 9 hours, bro. Like, I just rested. And I'm like, that's not what Sabbath is.
Right.
At all.
Yep.
At all, man. Like, in a typical Jewish house right now for Sabbath, that TV does not go on.
Right.
You're not allowed to watch television. You're spending time with God. You're singing psalms and hymns and prayers and reading Torah and spending time together as a family.
Yeah.
That's what Sabbath is, and so I think there's that weird side where like people will like, yeah, I never left my house today. Like, I just played video games, I watched TV, and I was on TikTok. Like, dude, that's not rest. Because you do that, the next day you feel awful.
Yeah.
Still feel tired.
Because you didn't really rest.
Yeah.
So, and it's just a bad steward of your time. You're not investing in things that matter. So,
Right.
so there's that. And then there's the people like me who can't rest, and they're working themselves to death. And they're doing it for any matter of any reason. There's different motivations, either to earn the approval of God, to earn the approval of others, to find identity and fulfillment in the things of earth, whatever it is for you. But so we got to find somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I think that's a great way.
dude, just someone
else needs to do this.
just the way you do. I think.
I think it's like the confirmation. Like, you guys can't see. Hopefully one day
you
we'll-
can't see.
But like, I
Look at us. Like,
He gives us this look. He goes, I think.
I love how you explained it, but you gave no context.
The eyes,
Yes, he
are
tilts his
open,
face
and he
down.
kind of tilts his face, and then he like has this big smirk.
Yep.
It's when Children's Pastor Rich comes out.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, guys.
I think. Hey, they told me routine is important. Okay.
Popcorn reading is over now. Roll up your carpet square.
But thank you guys for tuning in. We hope this was helpful. And I do think that this podcast episode is a little different because I do think that, honestly, we are all working through this. There are times where I'm thinking, like, man, I feel convicted about my time. And there are also times where I don't bring it to God because I'm expecting the angry dad crossing his arms being like, but if we view God like that, we're never going to find the answer to this question.
Yep.
We can't be afraid to be like, search me and know me, God. And, hey, if you're in the place where you're like, yeah, I probably shouldn't be binging social media nonstop, or maybe you're in another camp where you're like, I can't find a biblical reason or a godly reason to relax in any way, shape, or form. If we could give any just last practical advice from all of this, I would say is just to seek God out.
Yeah.
and that like resources are great like this, podcast, books. Yes, I'm sure there's wonderful resources about the theology of leisure activity and Sabbath, right? But you know what? It's greater than all of that, your discernment and trying to bring that to God yourself. Maybe not finding all the answers, but I think that all of us can find something that we can be comfortable with in our day-to-day if we're not comfortable with it right now. So thank you for tuning in. I hope this was helpful for you, and we'll see you next time.